Okay, Jameson is doing his schoolwork. I thought this was my best chance to make a video, although it will be short and euphemistic. I did think of a word we can use instead of prostitute for tomorrow. We might use the word professional, more respectful also of sex workers. Um, okay, I want to point out a couple of things that are maybe more mundane than the story itself. The first is that this begins as a collection of, it begins as a letter. There are 2 volumes in case you haven't looked yet. So when I told you to read to page 89, that means the end of the first volume or letter. And then the second volume or letter is where we begin for Friday's class. So the book begins, Madam, I sit down to give you an undeniable proof of my considering your desires as indispensable orders. Someone's asked her to write all of this out, so she's being sort of forced to do it. Bummer for her, maybe, I don't know, good for us. And then we get the sort of reference to Shyamala down here. It reminds us of Shyamala when she says, first of all, hating as I mortally do all unnecessary prefaces, I shall give you good quarter in this and then use no farther apology than, okay, so she's gonna skip the long introductory part where she would talk about some sort of apology, but apology in the sense of defense of, not in the sense that we mean it today. And then truth, stark naked truth is the word, and I will not so much as take the pains to bestow the strip of a gauze wrapper on it. All right. Remind me on Friday, if I forget, to show you some pictures and illustrations of this book that will remind us of the ones I showed you for Pamela. And they are indeed stark naked truth. Okay. I want to point out a couple of other things about the narrative. The first is that her innocence, this is on page 2 now, although it's not, doesn't have to be a quotation, is not founded in virtue, the way Pamela's was, but in an ignorance of vice. And she's setting down her failure as a virtuous woman to a lack of education about what virtue meant. She was just too ignorant to know that vice was around, I guess, which also makes us think back to Pamela and how much she understood about sex actually. She understood lots. Okay. She gets, there's another reference to virtue on page 3. I love it. She gets taken in by this unhappy house. There are references here to Moll Flanders also, if you're looking for them. And things go badly. But at some point, she meets, well, first she meets Phoebe, right? And Phoebe does this thing, we're going to notice this a lot, where Phoebe penetrates her with her fingers, and what's missing there has nothing to do with the clitoris, which John Cleland doesn't seem to know about, but that the fingers aren't adequate. They're not big enough, right? So that's the problem. That's why she's not getting relief. Okay. But soon, when she gets into the house that she's going to stay in, which happens at some point, she meets him on page 34, someone called Charles. And she loves Charles. And she, in fact, runs away with him, which is actually what I meant by getting into a good house, is that she gets her virginity taken by Charles, who's in love with her, and then he has to leave tragically which gives her an opportunity to go back and have all sorts of adventures that she wants to talk to us about. But she does start, where's the end? She does start the this period of her life with one true love. Okay, and they're both about the same age, and it's totally appropriate. They happen to meet in a whorehouse, and he happened to take her out of a bad situation. Okay, but independent of the fact that she's a professional, we do get this sort of beginning of a story arc, but she gets to have a lot of the adventures that normally are reserved for men, right? She, which comes up in large part in volume 2, but she does start out as this innocent girl who's comes to some sort of crisis and then meets like some sort of meet cute, right? Meeting in a whorehouse is always the way true love begins. And then he sort of rescues her in this way, which could be the end of the story, and then they would get married and everything would be fine. But instead there's this other conflict. So we get into like another act, and then he has to sort of go off and have his adventures, and then she gets to have her own instead of just waiting, which is what a virtuous woman would do. Okay, so there is a narrative arc here that we're going to talk about, and then we'll also talk about all of the synonyms and all of the ways in which one has to describe sex over and over and over again and try to make it interesting, again, with synonyms or with, as a couple of you have already noted, like very scary and impressive and manly penis size. Okay, I hope you're liking it. And that's it.